So came up with Rusty, Rosy, and Autism. Disabilities in the digital age. Though Dexter Fletcher was just telling me about working with children with severe autism, nonverbal children, in the 1960s using assembly language. So we're not new to this frontier, but there have in the last 30 years been lots of treatments for autism which have been suggested. Many of them have been suggested as miracle cures, and none of them, when you put good science to them, have worked out yet. We still have no miracle cures for autism. One other thing I want to talk about is what is autism and why we have such a hard time coming up with cures for it. There are three core areas of impairment in autism. The primary area is social interaction, impaired reciprocal social interaction, back and forth exchanges. It's called autism, in fact, after the Greek word auto for self, because of a tendency maybe to hang with yourself and not be so interested in what other people are doing. Now, some of our neuroimaging work has shown that, for example, when most of us look at a face, in fact, I would go so far as to say anyone in this room looking at a face, if we're doing fMRI, we're going to see activation of the fusiform face area, sort of on the right temporal lobe, on the bottom of the temporal lobe, about halfway along the fusiform gyrus. There's going to be a face-specific area. Doesn't happen in autism as a whole, although it depends on how familiar is the person you're looking at and things like that. But instead we see faces being processed in the brain of kids with autism in the same area where most of the rest of us would process objects like chairs and airplanes and patterns. However, we have at least one case example where someone with autism was interested in Digimon. We showed Digimon characters during fMRI, and the face area lit up just fine when looking at Digimon characters. So there's something different about the way social interactions are perceived and executed. There are also difficulties with communication that might be not speaking at all, or it might be speaking too much. And in either case, you have a hard time getting along with people if you don't know when to shut up, or if you don't talk at all. And then odd behaviors, repetitive behaviors, stereotype behaviors. These are the three core domains that make up autism, with lots and lots and lots of variability. And that's the point of my next slide, is to say it's a spectrum disorder. There's no on or off switch for autism. There are impairments in these three domains, and some can be a lot for one person and less for another person. So really we're having a hard time making a definition of what is autism. In fact, we don't have a definition for autism, other than say that there might be lots of disorders that we currently call autism. We have lots of names for cancer. We have breast cancer and pancreatic cancer, lung cancer. They all have different causes. And they all have different treatments. You don't want to treat breast cancer the same way you do lung cancer. With autism currently, we're stuck with just one thing, one autism, even though there's probably lots of causes and lots of treatments. I just read an article a couple weeks ago by Daniel Geschwind, a geneticist at UCLA, who said a study of 10 or 12 randomly selected autistic patients may best be described as individuals with 10 or more different disorders. This makes outcome research a challenge. Right? So that's the framework. I say doing autism outcome research is a challenge. Things that come along for the ride in autism, they're not primary impairments, but they include cognitive impairment. Maybe 40–50% of kids with autism will be mentally retarded. Seizures come along often, up to a third, and lots of depression, anxiety, tics, ADHD, and any regulatory issues, sleeping, eating, pooping. These are all areas of difficulty that we see frequently. This is a slide that my advisor in graduate school put together many years ago. Areas of learning difficulty in autism. It includes difficulties with language, especially difficulties with abstraction, humor, metaphors, anything like that can be very difficult to understand. I have a girl that I think has Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism, who rides in my carpool every day, and we've been listening to Cats, the musical. And she's very put out by the fact that a cat must have 3 different names. And one of the names, no one knows but the cat. And why would you have a name if nobody knows it, right? And she's having a really hard time with the fact that these cats have names that no one uses. Imitation can be difficult, sequencing, organization, and attention span and focus. So let me ask the 4th grade teacher. What do 4th graders out of these things use to learn?
All of them.
All of them. So if we have difficulty with any of them, which ones of this list do you think are most important?
attention span's pretty important.
Attention span. Yeah, we're going to come back to that.
I don't know which would be most important. They're about the same.
Okay. So many children with autism have difficulties with at least one or two or all of these. And so learning in an academic setting can be very difficult. It's not always difficult, but it can be. I forgot motivation, which I'm also going to come back to. Okay. This is a quote from Temple Grandin, sort of our most famous person with autism in this country, who said, "Because I have autism, I live by concrete rules instead of abstract beliefs. And because I have autism, I think in pictures and sounds. I don't have the ability to process abstract thought the way you do. Here's how my brain works. It's like the search engine Google for images. If you say the word love to me, I'll surf the internet inside my brain. Then a series of images pops into my head. What I'll see, for example, is a picture of a mother horse with a foal. She's a veterinary science professor. Her job is to design humane ways to slaughter cattle. Or I think of Herbie the love bug, scenes from the movie Love Story or the Beatles song Love, Love, Love. Some people think if I could snap my fingers, I'd choose to be normal. But I wouldn't want to give up my ability to see in beautiful, precise pictures. I believe in them," she says. Our school system is pretty verbal based, and we're looking at other ways to go, but this is a teacher talking and people listening. And that's not how Temple Grandin works. So it's important to mention just for a moment what are potential causes of autism, and I don't have time to list multiple causes. I'll tell you the most current theory, which is there's inefficient processing of information in the brain, especially across long-range connections, front to back and side to side. So that people with autism can be very good at dealing with details or little bits of information, but have a hard time integrating it all together. Things get stuck from one side of the brain to the other, and things that ought to be done in other areas of your brain end up going into the frontal lobes to sort of get more processing done, leaving your frontal lobes unavailable for things your frontal lobes ought to be doing, like planning ahead and understanding a social interaction. There's some talk that social information is specifically challenged, but you might just think of this as information overload. You realize if you're in a social interaction, right, there's a proper distance you have to stand. There's facial expressions, there's tone of voice, there's the rate of speech, there's the loudness of speech. There's the concrete versus abstract nature of what you're saying. There's gestures, there's body posture, all of this coming at you and being processed instantly. Computers can't do it, right? And it's amazing that our brains can do it, but if we have too much information coming in at once, maybe that's where it breaks down in autism. And then I want to think about this disconnectivity model. We have underconnectivity and how that might affect learning. Okay, treatments for autism currently, the most frequently given treatment is applied behavioral analysis or intervention. Consists of 30, 40 hours a week of one-on-one care. It's discrete trials, so you work on one little task at a time. It's usually one-on-one or one-on-two. It's very expensive. It helps, but it's also very narrow. And one of the most heartbreaking things for me as a clinician, actually, is to see parents come in who spent $50,000 in 2 years of their life on full-time treatment for autism. And my assessment is much more naturalistic. I'm going to be on the floor or at the table with the child, asking them to do things which are hard for people to do. For little kids, it might even be holding up 2 snacks in Rubbermaid containers, asking them to tell me which one they want. Will they grab it? Will they use words? Will they use gestures? Will they point? Then I might give it to them, but I've snipped the tab off so it's kind of hard to open. And if they can't open the little container, how will they ask for help? And some of these kids that spent all this time doing all this treatment can't do this sort of naturalistic, semi-structured stuff. And I have parents telling me, well, you're doing it wrong. Right? I'm like, well, you're right. I'm not following the rules. I'm not saying this doesn't work, but I am saying it's very narrowly focused and has a hard time generalizing to other situations. That's one of the difficulties with our treatment. Jessica leads a social skills group. It's lots of fun, but it's lots of adventures. My job, I have 3 groups going on at the same time on Thursday afternoons, and I just sort of walk around the building waiting to see which disaster is going to happen first. And the therapists are all dealing with that, and then we try and help them along. That tries to be more generally and problem-solving focused, but my highest functioning group of kids, teenagers, completely lost it, 2 weeks ago when we gave them a game of Uno. We processed it ahead of time. We wrote the rules down on the board. We said, we're going to change a couple of the rules. We're going to play Uno by different rules. And I thought they could handle it. They couldn't. Every one of them just really had a hard time with that, and the group completely fell apart. So the final thing I want to bring up about treatment is this article by Lynn Kogel many years ago, Children with Autism, Can't They or Won't They? And this is what parents have to go through all the time, right? Are they refusing to do it? Or do they not know how to do it? And I once asked a group of parents, what are all the things that can go wrong if you ask your child to take out the trash? And they talked about it for an hour, and they weren't done, right? From attention to memory, you get distracted, you didn't understand the instructions, you don't know how to come back, all sorts of things. So if you take a simple task like that, then you have to think about, well, what if we ask them to do other sorts of things, more complicated sorts of things. But I also know from psychology research that just because they're not doing it doesn't mean they don't know how to do it. And Tolman's latent learning with rats is a great example. So you give rats a treat to get through a maze, and they learn pretty quickly. They like Fruit Loops. Rats like Fruit Loops. So you give a rat a Fruit Loop, and they learn to get through a maze pretty quickly. You send other rats through a maze, and they don't get a Fruit Loop. And it takes them a long time. But if, like, on the 11th day, this is what Tolman did. On the 11th day, you then give a Fruit Loop. The rats learn very quickly, like instantly. And so they knew it all along. They just didn't have the proper motivation. Okay? So I also want to talk about measurement issues, and this is what Dr. Fletcher and I were talking about earlier. Not everything is as it seems in autism. In fact, I would say not anything is as it seems. And so we are going to take even the most reliable measure. Let me show you IQ. There is no more reliable measure in psychological literature than IQ test. The Wechsler scales, a whisk or a waist, good validity, good reliability. It's as good as it gets. Here's what it looks like in autism. This is verbal intelligence, this is nonverbal intelligence. IQ is supposed to be a pretty unitary construct. It's also supposed to be reliable. It's neither when we're dealing with autism. So this kid is really high here, really low here, on different aspects of what's supposed to be the same sort of thing, and the same for their nonverbal IQ. When we talk about IQ and autism, we don't talk about big constructs like verbal intelligence or nonverbal intelligence or even intelligence. We talk about specific sets of strengths and specific sets of weaknesses. So even using our best measure, it often comes out goofy when we're studying autism. Okay? An undergraduate student of mine, Jamie Ballard, and I went looking for outcome measures of autism, and there aren't any. And the ones that people are using for outcome measures in autism stink. And what we did especially was go and interview parents and teachers, teachers who work in preschools with autism. We ran focus groups, and we just listened to what they said, what's important to measure about outcome in autism, and it doesn't match up at all with the existing measures. There's just like no match. Parents, for example, are really concerned about aggression and tantrums. Well, that's not in measures of how often you make eye contact, which is sort of a more standard way to look at it. So that's the background to say autism's hard to define and autism's hard to measure. So what are we going to do? We're going to take a group of kids with autism, we're going to give them intervention and see if it works. As with most studies, this came about naturally. Waterford is using this early learning software. I don't know how many of you have seen these little drives that's got entire sets of software on it for learning reading or learning math. You can plug it into any computer, a Mac or a PC, and it comes up. So that's really cool. And while they were giving this to a big group of people, one child who happened to have autism was involved in this, and it turned out great. The child loved the software. The child made great gains on doing the software. So Waterford came to me and said, could we do a pilot study to see how well this works in children with autism? Where are we at, Haya?
6 minutes.
6 minutes left? Okay. So the things I like about Waterford software is it has engaging sound and animation. It's building specific processes and specific skills, but moving towards integration of bringing it all together. My graduate school advisor ran a neuropsychology test in 1995 where if it was given by a human, the kids with autism struggled. If it was given by a computer, the kids with autism did just fine. So maybe taking out that social interaction will help. And it's really easy to use. We have basic computer skills, right? You just have to be able to click a mouse, and you can use it at home. So that's where we got into it. I'm going to now go very quickly through the rest to say we assign them to either the reading program or the math program, ERP or EMS, math and science. We want them to use it 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week for 5 months. So we're looking for about 1,500 minutes of use. All right, that's been shown in other Waterford testing to be a good benchmark to shoot for. Then we're going to bring them back, do the same skills test again, and then we're going to cross them over so they'll get the alternate treatment. So we're studying math and reading simultaneously, one group of kids, and then we'll cross them over and get them started. Okay? Each family just takes home a little drive. It runs off your computer. We gave them a kitchen timer if they want to help their kids keep track. They're not allowed to play the free play, which they like, until they've done their 15 minutes. And each child picked out their own icon. And then we had families, if they were low on usage, we would give them some calls. Okay, so off we go. We recruited 27 children. We had 23 families. We had a number of other children that we assessed but didn't start. They didn't start. It took us about 7 months to get everybody together, and everyone was really happy to say, let's go. Here's our baseline. I'm going to skip this. What I'm going to say is that our math and reading groups were perfectly matched, randomly assigned on all key variables. All right, so I'm just going to skip that. Let me get through this. There's reading scores, there's math scores, there's our reading skills. Okay, here's a couple things we looked at. There was a significant positive correlation between age and reading skill. So the older you were, the better you were at reading. That was good. But there was a significant negative correlation between age and reading risk. Measured on the dibbles, basically, the older these kids got, the less risk they had, showing to me, I think, that the kids with autism are just taking longer to catch up. Because the risk should be sort of age-based, and there is this correlation in autism. I think it's just taking them a little longer. All right. And then I'm going to skip that too. Okay. Then the wheels fell off. And this is important to know. A number of families got broken computers. Some of our families had broken drives. Some of our families moved away. One went to Florida, one went to Washington. Okay? Waterford downsized, and some of their staff, which were supporting this, were no longer available. And BYU also had a hiring freeze, which meant I'm teaching 300 students a semester and don't have as much time as I'd like available to this. Okay? We had some people say the software was too easy, it wasn't challenging them. Most kids we had say in the end it was too hard. That is, it started okay on the easy stuff, okay? And the kids did fine for a while, but then what the software does, the software is supposed to match the person's progress. But the kids with autism weren't able to make some of these leaps. And so then the software got too hard, and they weren't able to keep up. That happened in a number of cases, and this is me talking to parents as they would come in for their second assessment to say, how's it going? And I heard this a number of times. It was going fine, but then it got really hard, and now it's really hard to make my kid do it. They don't want to do it anymore, right? So they did it for a long time. Okay, so we were able to get 14 children out of our 27 in so far. I don't know if we're going to get any more, frankly. We've really run into some real difficulty here. All right, 1 minute. So we got 51% of our kids back. No baseline demographics to say why these people are different. Our completers and our non-completers are the same in everything. Okay, here's reading risk. Math on the left, reading on the right. Just a slight downward trend, but not anything to write home about. Our math group actually has higher scores here for reading outcome, even though they weren't getting any reading intervention. Our reading intervention people, we had 4 of them actually went down on their skill level on the second assessment. I'm going to come right back to that. Okay, and our math group did get better in math. It's not significant, but it's actually at least showing an upward trend for math. Okay, here's two users, both reading program users. JR started at about 6, moderate to severe autism severity, high baseline math score. He had the lowest baseline reading score of anybody. He used it about 1,700 minutes, and he had this great big change. He got way better at his reading scores. He he got way worse at his math scores at the same time. Okay, whereas ST started high, had the third highest baseline reading score, and then had this huge drop in his reading score on the second assessment. So I just want to make sense of this. I'm going to skip this here. First of all, one-shot measures aren't adequate, especially because of motivation and attention. I could have a child come in on one day, and who knows what we're going to get out of them. And since we only measured them on one day, right, it may not be that that child dropped on their reading score, because lots of parents are saying, oh yeah, they're doing better. I also had parents tell me they're learning to read, but it's not being measured by what our measures are using, right? Even the WACs. Okay, so we might have variation at motivation and attention. Even within a test session, we had some kids that did much better at reading than they did before, and much worse at math than they did before. Okay, just to think that if we want to add more measurements, though, every 2 weeks, every month, that's going to just blow up the cost for the study, right? The amount of effort it puts into the study. But clearly, if we're going to do the study right, I think this is the first thing we have to do. We have to add more measurements. We also need adequate change measures, especially for the math. We use the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. The math test is requires a lot of verbal comprehension. And so there's a sense that some of these kids are learning math, but we're not testing it properly. So that's one thought. What we did find, though, is even with this nice technology, it's fun to use, kids still need lots of concentrated effort to help them use it. We can't just it's not like going to Disneyland, right? We can't just set them to do this and off they go. There's kind of some hope of that, but it's not magic. And then finally, there's lots of issues with measurements, and we can fix those issues with measurements, but it is possible that it won't work with autism. Because of the difficulties with learning in autism, even though I think the Waterford Early Learning software gives us the best chance to do something along the lines of what we'd expect, it might be that at least in its current iteration, it's just not able to progress enough with these kids, or that they require more intervention than we can give them. I think that, you know, with different circumstances, if we maybe gave this in a school rather than gave it at home, if they had more focused time spent on this, and we're encouraging their motivation, encouraging their attention, we might be able to make it work. But under the circumstances we did it, where we sort of gave it out and said, let's go and see if it works, we're not showing it right now. I don't think it's a lost cause. I just think we need to think about how we're going to do this in the future. So that's why I have to say I'm actually really eager for suggestions about how we could do this better in the future.
Do you have time for questions?
Tell me exactly how the monitoring of the parent or the time on with the device, how do you
Yeah, so the device is actually connected to a server, and Hi, correct me if I'm wrong, but it connects through an internet connection. So you have to have an internet connection, and it's sending real-time data back about progress and about time, scores and time spent on the program. So we would get, before the downsizing all around, weekly reports about how much each child was spending on free play and as well as on the time. And then if we saw they were down, we would call them and say, you know, your time's down, can we help you, what's going on? So the Waterford servers are getting real-time feedback on how much time the child's on all the time.
So you didn't have to pull each one of the devices back and plug them in?
Nope, it's connected to the internet.
Okay.
There's one family that didn't have an internet connection, which we actually provided for them, and they're using it a lot. One of the families that got a computer broken, though, they also, when I called them about their computer, they had a window broken in their kitchen, their water heater was broken, so they didn't have hot water, and their heater was broken. So this family was really struggling. They had three children with autism, and a dad probably on the autism spectrum too. So they dropped out, even though we tried to give them a lot of support. Yeah. Suggestions? Yeah, so
We use Word and we're really good with, so we've been looking for some take home. Do you know if Waterford actually has that product on the market?
I'm going to have Haya answer.
Yes.
Okay.
As it is, so we can.
We'll talk.
Yeah, and I want to stress that there's lots of evidence that this works well with preschool children. And not finding the evidence so far that it works well with preschool children with autism, but there's lots of questions to answer.
There's also a really small sample size, so
yeah.
Trying to find a fact. And the fact is,
yeah, I'm still trying to figure out why half of the kids went got worse on their reading scores after doing 5 months of reading. And I think that Waterford is not disrupting their learning skills. I think it's just how we test them and how often we test them. That's the only answer that makes sense for me.
You probably have to do it longer.
Yeah. Yeah. The WACS itself, the reading assessment, it's a 45-minute assessment. I think we just have to do it more often, and maybe even in more structured circumstances. So we intentionally let them sit down and do it, and we had a research assistant sitting next to them saying, you need to keep on task, but maybe we could structure.
So right there, what you said might be one of his problems, because it's supposed to take 20 minutes, not 45 minutes. So.
Well, but it goes twice.
Right. So, but it's in 20 minute
Yeah.
sessions. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So, and they take a break, but we sort of did the naturalistic way. We're like, sit down and do the assessment, and we're sitting next to them to remind them to stay on task. But that's all we were doing, and some of the tasks, especially the tasks that had a lot of verbal comprehension and reading involved, were very difficult.
How interactive is the Waterford materials? That is to say, how many times a minute does a kid have to do something? Hit a key, say something, whatever.
It's very interactive. You have to be hitting keys all the time. Essentially, it'll show you a single trial and it builds, from learning letters to learning words to learning sentences, and so it's asking you for feedback all of the time, almost constantly.
Okay, so several times,
Yeah.
a minute, maybe.
Yeah, you might read a long passage that it's going to take a minute, and then you have to answer questions about it. But it's essentially just back and forth between you and the software all of the time. Yeah.
Thanks.
So I was asking, this time that's tracked by the server, how do you know that that's active time? Like, is it when the keystrokes are, is it active time or just log on time?
No, it's active time.
Okay.
After they don't touch it for 2 minutes or something like that, then it's considered as time.
counted.
One thing I didn't have time to show, because we have unpublished data from Ben Houston and others showing that for regular populations, time spent using the program is the best predictor of outcome. And that didn't turn out to be the case for us. Actually, what we did see an association between was time spent using the program and baseline reading skills. So those who were better to start with used it more, or vice versa. It's a correlational finding. But that was what we found. But we didn't see a prediction of outcome with time spent learning. But again, our outcome measures, I think, are just not, our outcome measures aren't where they need to be to say, are these kids actually learning to work? And we did have qualitative reports from parents saying, my child's doing so much better in reading, but we're not showing it on our outcome measures, or at least not on that day, taking the outcome measure.
And the outcome measures were never validated on autistic kids either. So.
Yeah. So there is no outcome measures validated on autistic kids for anything.
Right.
So this is one of the just challenges we're up against. We really want to think about how could we do this smarter next time. Any other questions? Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have one question. So I'm reading your abstract. Instead of saying that it offers tremendous potential,
Yes.
are you suggesting it offers modest potential?
Yeah, so we wrote that back when we were looking at, our first few kids, and it's still a small sample size. It's really a question for me right now of whether it offers potential at all. And so putting this talk together has been very useful for thinking about that. All the elements are in place to say it could offer potential, right? The reason I did an outcome study, even though I don't have tenure yet, which is not really smart, is because I think that if anything's going to work, it will be this kind of thing. But there's just lots of issues to work through still. So that's the question we're asking: is how much potential? I guess how much potential does it offer?
If I can just intervene for a second here, I think the real challenge about computers and kids is matching what happens on the screen to the child. And when you don't have an adult there to scaffold the interaction, things start to go wrong. And if you have a child with autism, the chances are that things are going to go wrong more often.
Well, that was my question even about Jeff's talk, is, you have to have this adult intervention, and even with my bright ninth grader, that has to be there. And so I guess how can we get parents engaged? And this is why maybe bringing this out of the home but putting it in the school again is going to make it easier to monitor and track. But I agree with you, absolutely.
Thank you.